Research into news translation is relatively recent. It started about 10, 15 years ago. Just this book by Bielsa and Wessner, Translation News Agencies. Roberto Valdeon recently published an article in Perspectives about 15 years of researching news translation. And what has been identified so far is news translation is a very complex phenomenon. We have multiple sources, so it's not one source text, one target text, as in traditional translation. We have multiple sources. They can be in multiple languages, from different sources, different authors, different genres, as I have shown you in some of the examples. So we rarely have a complete source text and a complete target text which we can compare to what we normally do in translation if we want to identify particular strategies. Translation is hidden in the text production process. And very often, the language versions are produced by the journalists themselves, multilingual journalists. And so translation is entwined with every aspect of news production. Journalists would not call themselves translators. So they say, we are not translating, no, we are producing texts. So translation is this kind of literary production, we are writing for our authors, for our readers. So we do find transformations in news translations, omissions, additions, restructuring, which are determined by the purpose, the institutional practice and policies, and governed above all by the values of journalism. Speed, so news has to be out quickly. There's no time for checking and revision. Readability, also cultural acceptability, desirability, specific cultural sensitivities. It's this translation then. So the example I showed you. Can we speak of translation if there is no one source text, one target text? Or should we use another term? Trans-editing is a term which has often been used by people who look into news translation. This is a term which was initially suggested by Karen Stetting back in '89, but not for news translation, but she wanted to account for the fuzzy border between translating and editing. And she has actually said that there are 5 cases where trans-editing is practiced. Subtitling, shortening of passages. And news is just point 4, journalists drawing on material in other languages for writing their own text. It's just one of the cases which she gives as an example of this trans-editing. So is there help for research in using trans-editing instead of translation? And if we adopt a label like trans-editing when we talk about news translation, what does it mean for our concept of translation? Are we then not back to say, well, translation is the real thing, so the close equivalent reproduction, everything else needs a different label. So what about all our development in the discipline, which I mentioned some slides before, when we look at social practices and so on?